friend, I'm Amy, and if you've ever felt like doing the right thing when no one's around is harder than it should be, then this story is for you. Today, we're going to walk through Genesis 39 using my simple method and looking at how Joseph showed self-control in his private moments that most people would excuse. So grab your Bible and a notebook and let's study this passage together. So the first thing we're going to do in the simple method is study the passage, and that means don't skip reading it. Read it word for word and highlight things that stick out. Sometimes you're looking for context clues so that you could connect to other stories that you've read in the Bible. You might be looking for some unknown words. You want to dig into what does that word mean. If you can't find anything to highlight, you can find action phrases and kind of try to find patterns and repetitions in those things. This one is a passage in Genesis, and Genesis is very much written in a narrative, a storybook format. So it's easy to follow along with what's happening in here rather than a bouncing around to different things. So all I'm going to do is, I don't know what part of the story that we're in Genesis until I start reading and diving in. Obviously, I've read this beforehand, but for you at home who haven't read this morning, I want you to grab your highlighter and highlight some things that help you follow along with the storyline so that when you go to the next step, you can paraphrase, okay, this is what happened. All right, how can we build on that to understand why this is in the Bible? What's the purpose of it? What does it teach us about who God is and who he calls us to be? So let's go ahead and get a highlighter. Any color is fine. I'm going to use yellow. And we're going to read chapter 39 in Genesis. Mine's on 2 pages, so I am going to have to flip, so I apologize for that. But here we go in verse 1. Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So I'm going to highlight this because it already tells me 2 people in this story. And I already know who Joseph is. He's the coat of many colors guy. So I have a tiny bit of background knowledge. If you've been to Sunday school, you'll have that background knowledge, a little bit of his story. And so that's kind of things that you're looking for. What can help me understand the context of this story? Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Joseph is in Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials. Potiphar, and normally I wouldn't highlight every single word, but this is very important. It's given me tons of information. Joseph has been taken to Egypt. He is also, another character is Potiphar and his wife, an Egyptian. So Potiphar's an Egyptian and he's one of Pharaoh's official. He's captain of the guard, and he's the one who bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So I'm going to highlight that whole first section because that is like when you're an English teacher or a student and they're like, what's the main idea and the details? These are those details that are popping out that will help you understand what that main idea is. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. So I'm going to write, he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw the Lord was with him, the Lord gave him success in everything he did. He had success. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of the household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. So the Lord blessed the house because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, and with Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So Joseph is in charge. I'm going to highlight that. And then it says, now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said to come to bed with me. So his master's wife said, come to bed with me. But Joseph refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. Flip the page. I'm on still on verse 9. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? So I'm going to highlight that. That's kind of a main thing, his main point that he made. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. He refused. And so in verse 11, it says, one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. All right, so that last sentence I'm going to highlight. When she saw he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She kept his cloak beside her until the master came home. And then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight one sentence in that just to show what her side of the story was. When the master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So he's put in prison. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. And the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Okay, so the next step is illustrate. And so now that we've highlighted, that gives us a visual to look at of kind of the main things that happen. So that we start remembering, okay, he was blessed, he was tempted, he refused, he was put in prison, and then he was blessed again. And so these are kind of like these thoughts, this pattern that comes up in your mind as you're looking over these highlights that you did. So now we're going to make it more visual by illustrating some things. And what I'd like to do is kind of give a little bit of just a quick illustration for some context. So we know Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and I remember Joseph is the coat of many colors kid. So I'm going to draw him I'm just going to draw some things that help me remember the context when I look at this. So if I come back later, I'm like, oh yeah. So this just looks like a regular guy. So I'm going to add some colors. Just with my highlighters is fine. We're going to show his coat has many colors. And then if that's not enough for you to go, oh, got it. When I flip to this page, we're talking about Joseph with the coat of many colors who was sold by his brother to Egypt to be a slave in Egypt. And so if that doesn't do it for you, you can always write notes to it. Joseph sold by brothers to Egyptian. Okay, so he's in Egypt. And then the next step, there's probably other things you might think of that you want to illustrate, and you can do that. But this one, I want to move on to the map step because I don't think we need as many illustrations on this one. I think we need a quick synopsis of what happened. So here's his timeline. I'm going to do just a couple bullet points on things that happened in Joseph's life based on this passage. Okay, this one, I'm getting a little bit of context from my prior knowledge. So this is, I'm going to count that as the first bullet point, the very first one. He's sold by his brothers to Egyptian, and then it actually says he was bought from Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So he was sold by brothers to Ishmaelites, then to an Egyptian named Potiphar. So I'm just adding some more details there. So Joseph, technically, if you look back at that verse, it says he was bought from Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So he's been sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites to an Egyptian, and his name is Potiphar. So then the next thing that happens, I'm just looking at the story. I'm trying to map out a timeline of Joseph and what happened to him in this passage. So then Joseph was given authority over his household. And then he was seduced by his master's wife. And then you can flip your pages if you can't remember what happens next. But he refuses, and so he is imprisoned. Or he refuses, we could put here. Because he didn't go to prison because he refused. He went to prison because he was falsely accused and imprisoned. And then when he's in prison, the Lord blesses him and he is given authority by the jailer over the prison. And then later, this part isn't in the story. This is where our story ends. But if you remember, at the end of Joseph's story, if you've heard it before, he ends up helping the king interpret a dream. And then he is released from prison and given authority over the kingdom. And so you can leave this blank, and as you continue to study and read the rest of Genesis, add to it. I'm just going to kind of give you the cliff notes of the sneak peek to go ahead. So he's given authority over the prison. He interprets the king's dream. And then he's released and given authority over a kingdom. I'm running out of room. Okay, got it. And then I've got one more bullet point, so we might as well finish up the story. Then his brothers come back and he offers forgiveness to them. If you've never read this story as an adult, I highly suggest you read the story of Joseph in the coat, starting with the Joseph's coat of many colors, all the way to the end of the book of Genesis. It's a beautiful story with so many layers, and I think you'll just see it completely different than the way it's presented when you're a child, because they don't put a lot of the detail that is in the Bible when they're paraphrasing it for little children. And I think you'll just get a lot out of it. And that's kind of where I want to go with this next step with Personalize. And right here, I'm actually, before I move on, I'm going to do a little bit of color coding to show some of his highs and lows, basically. So this was a hardship. He's sold. Then he's given authority over the household because God is blessing him. He's seduced by the master's wife. He's falsely imprisoned, but then he's given authority over the prison. When he interprets the king's dream, he's released and given authority over the kingdom. And then he forgives his brothers. So I'm kind of just noticing some high points in his story. And what I want to do is this month in November, we're wrapping up our Fruit of the Spirit study, where we're talking about our last fruit of the Spirit, which is self-control. And if you look at what is happening. Every time he was blessed, it was based on a reaction he had to a circumstance that was really hard. So he's sold by his brothers. You don't hear in those stories, which you can go back and read those in the chapters before this one in Genesis. You don't hear about him complaining or rebelling against his master or running away or blaming people. You just hear that he is obedient and he is successful in what he does, that he's prosperous. And part of that, I would have to think that it has some connection to self-control. I can't imagine that he was okay with any of this. And so he took the situation that he was at and tried to make the best of it. Obviously, he loved God. He worshiped God. So he was leaning into that surrender and following what God had called him to do. And so he, even though he didn't know what was going to happen next, you don't see him losing it on these people or disrespecting authority, even if it was a completely unfair situation for him. And so he's blessed with authority over the household because his master trusts him and the Lord is blessing him. And then he has this opportunity where he could multiple times, which I can't help but notice the link to Samson, when a woman is constantly throwing herself at this man. And Samson's reaction to that is the complete opposite of what Joseph's is. And Joseph is basically saying, why would I do this to sin against God? So we highlighted a sentence that said in verse 9, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? So it goes back to that I'm having self-control right now, not for myself or my master, it's for my God. I'm not going to sin against God. So that self-control he had, even though he was imprisoned, because of his self-control, his respect for authority, his kindness, his gentleness, all those Holy Spirit things that we've studied this year, he was given authority over the prison. And then there's some terrible things that happen, and he is not given the credit that he's due. But eventually, the king notices him and his talent, and he releases him and gives him authority over the kingdom. And then it full circles to the people that wronged him and caused all this. He actually forgives them at the end. So all of this to say that what is his motivation for all of this? It all goes back to his relationship with God, is his trusting God, his persevering God. And you can see in each step, it just seems so unfair. It's like one step forward, two steps backwards. But when the whole story is unraveled, you see, okay, Joseph, this one thing happened after the other. But what happened at the end is he's given authority over the entire kingdom. He saves his whole people from famine, from being wiped out. He forgives his brothers, and then their lives are changed. Their families are changed. So many good things that happen through this. Joseph's father, let's move on to this in the next step, link, and I'll come right back to Personalize. But I am going to jump over to link real quick because I can't help but notice what's happening right here is that Joseph is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. His sons become part of the tribes of Israel, and those go through all the kings, and they're referenced in the New Testament and all this. So his legacy is timeless. We're still talking about his genealogy and the things that Joseph did and what an example he was because of his trust in God. So when you're finding all these things that you're noticing, oh, this goes with this and this goes with that, that's what my link step is trying to look for those clues. And I have some tools I want to show you to dig deeper if you're like, well, I didn't know any of that stuff. How am I supposed to figure that out? I'm going to give you some tools in a minute, but let's go back to Personalize, where I kind of jumped the gun here. But Personalize is when you take this information that we've written, I want you to figure out how to apply this to your own personal growth. So what lesson can we learn? And if we focus on that self-control lesson, we can look at these notes, keep your eyes open, and say a prayer about asking God for self-control like Joseph. So you might say, Lord, I don't feel like I have that kind of self-control to not be so reactive to things that happen to me, and help me to be more trusting so that self-control comes easier. Lord, I wish, or I want blessings in my life like Joseph, you gave to Joseph, but I need to become who you have called me to be. Help me with this self-control in areas A, B, C, whatever. So you're opening your eyes, you're looking at this, you're trying to pray it and kind of think through and work through how it relates to you and how you can grow from this as well. So you're praying that out loud. And then the other thing you could do is journal. Okay, so this is what I've asked for. Maybe I'm just going to start journaling out. What do I feel God is leading me action steps to take? Maybe he's telling me to stop trying to control everything and sit back and listen. Or maybe he's saying, you have this specific situation in your life, and I know you can't see what blessing is coming out of it, but you might be over here and think you're at the end of it. And really, when you get to the end of it, that's when you're going to understand. You might think, I should understand what's happening, but you're in the middle of it. And so trying to journal and pray these things, and Lord, I have no idea what's happening, but I'm going to trust you. Give me the self-control in this area to not give into these sins. And then the other thing you can do is find a memory verse within the text. And I loved that last verse in here that said, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And so remembering those qualities that Joseph had, the Lord was with Joseph. And because of Joseph's reaction to the Lord and his trust, and it wasn't that bad things never happened to Joseph, but the Lord still gave him success in whatever he did. And so maybe you even journal, okay, what does that success look like? What did it look like in Joseph's life? What does that look like in my life? And when it says God gave him success, he gave him prosperity, sometimes those things were taken away and then they were given back in a different form. What does that mean? It also makes me think of the book of Job. That might be a good book to look into. So let's go move on to the link step. And what I wanted to show you was these kind of notes, this note style, the simple note style is how I take my notes personally. And then I have compiled them when I've cleaned them up and kind of organized them into more of a notes on the whole book format rather than just one random chapter at a time. I've compiled them into notes for the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I'm working on these digital notes becoming physical books. And so I just recently put out my physical book with all my notes from the books of the Bible in the Old Testament. And you should expect the New Testament book to come out next year. And I'm working on that. I have it in digital format right now, but I'm so excited to have it in physical format. And what I wanted to show you was I have notes for all the books of the Bible, just these kind of simple note style, a snapshot, usually 2 pages, unless it's a really short book, it's 1 page. But most of them are 2 pages, and it just gives you some extra context. So if I'm in Genesis, I'm flipping over to Genesis, and then I'm looking for information about Joseph, and I see Joseph is on this page. So on this page, I learn, okay, what was she talking about? The 12 tribes of Israel. Well, Jacob had children through 2 wives and his wives' servants, and these are all the different children that he had. And then you can see each child eventually was their descendants were allotted land. This is where their land is. And then you can see Joseph is not on the land because he wasn't allotted land. His his sons were Jacob's grandsons, and they were allotted land, Manasseh and Ephraim. So Joseph got double portion because of his 2 sons. And this right here gives a synopsis real quick of Joseph's story. It kind of talks about some of these things we talked about, Potiphar's wife. So you can use these to look up that. It's also great for context when you're looking at other books of the Bible. It tells you kind of the connections. It's got some maps of different things. Here's another one of the land allotments of the 12 tribes. Here's some of the timelines where we've got down all the way here. Jacob is the father that we talked about, Joseph's father. He's in the genealogy. And Jesus's genealogy actually didn't lead through Joseph, it led through his brother Judah. So you learn lots of different things by having these things mapped out. You can also see these timelines where it talks about where did Joseph fit in? Right here. Here's Joseph. And if you're like, okay, I'm brand new to this, guess what else I have? In the back, you can just look up the name Joseph. I have an index for you, and it tells you every page I've mentioned Joseph, so that you can learn lots of things about Joseph and his story. And then the companion book that I made with this goes by book, and a book of the Bible, and this one is really exciting and special for me. I use this alongside that when I'm doing my research, is the women of the Old Testament. So a lot of times women are kind of an afterthought in these books, and I wanted to give you some background of really detailed information on every woman that I could find in the Bible. Potiphar, this is the only time that his wife is mentioned. And so I only have a little tiny section on her in the more Old Testament women page. But I do mention Potiphar's wife, and I also mention Joseph's wife, who they have like a few verses, but I wanted to make sure they were included here. And then you can also look over on this page, women in Jacob's family, and then you can learn some more about Joseph. So we've got Joseph right here, and then you learn, okay, what's that story about Rachel and Leah, the wives? Oh, they're actually sisters, and then their servants. How did all this work? And so there's all kinds of information. This tells all about Joseph's family, his nieces and nephews and his brothers and their mess, so you get a little bit more context. And that also has timelines and other special tools in here, but it has totally different information to add on to this so that you can use them together and get more perspective. And I think it's just really important as women that we don't skip over these stories that most people do when we're talking about women in the Bible, because they give us so much context about these characters we're talking about, like Joseph and Jacob. When we understand who their mothers were, who their grandmothers were, and then you make these connections of maybe that's why they made this decision, because they were raised like this, because their mother was in this situation or whatever. So I just love the richness that comes in that link step. But the last step right here is expand. And what I mean by that is just keep going. As you've seen I've done in this video, I've kind of just gone all kinds of directions. I'm like, oh, you could read Job and it would relate to this, or you could journal about this and it would help you understand how to grow personally and be transformed. You could buy these resources and dig deeper and learn how to start researching for yourself. You could watch more videos on the simple method and practice this over and over so it becomes more natural with whatever you're studying. But whatever it looks like, I've got tons of resources to help you with what to study next. And thank you so much for joining me today, because this passage really reminds us that integrity starts in the quiet places. We are just learning the importance of self-control that Joseph had and the blessings that it reaped not only on him, but the people around him, his family, and generations to come. If you're new here or you want to dive deeper, download my free Simple Method study guide at amycenter.com/simple and check out the printable tools I've also created to help you stay consistent. I'd love for you to leave a comment with what stood out to you, and remember, your private obedience shapes your public faith. Thank you guys. I'll see you next week.